Welcome to the Magdalene Voices, giving voice to those silenced for centuries through sacred conversations with beautiful, illuminating souls. I'm your host, spiritual business coach, mentor, catalyst, and facilitator Maria Estella. I serve spiritual entrepreneurs, Magdalenes Rising, and radiant beings just like you with the expansion and growth of yourself and your business, aligning you with your deep inner truth, bringing to life that which you are here to birth, and supporting you in expressing your soul's divine purpose through your being and your doing in this lifetime. If you haven't already, I highly encourage you to join my newsletter to stay connected and updated. You can do so on my website, mariaestella.com, where you can also find previous episodes and their show notes. And if you have ever wondered about your Magdalene connection and calling, and whether you are a Magdalene, I invite you to download the free Magdalene blueprint I've created for you. Go to mariaestella.com/AYM to get it. Finally, you've got 2 weeks if you want to take advantage of the early bird bonus for the Magdalene Rising Mastermind 2019 edition. So if 2019 is your year and you want to be supported as you grow yourself and your business from within, check out mariaestella.com/mastermind. Today I'm joined by the magnificent Alta for a deep dive into all things boundaries. Lauren is a personal growth facilitator for women. Through workshops, retreats, and one-on-one intensives, she teaches women how to stand in the brilliance of their own light so they always feel seen for who they really are and not just for what they do. The goal of her work is for more women to harness their own power and live boldly in their personal truth. Known for burning down the stale, fluffy, boring self-help formulas and helping women ignite true personal liberation, her workshops, retreats, and one-on-one intensives have been called transformation temples for unruly, soulful women. She believes loss, grief, and pain are healing initiations, and if honored, they will fortify you, bringing you through the shadows into the light of your soul. Using movement, meditation, ritual, art, and ancient practices, Lauren guides women on a spiritual journey, helping them surrender their facades, shed their fears, and finally come home to themselves. The essence of her work is distilled to freedom, supporting you in finding it, cultivating it, and living it. Because your power is in this moment, in this breath, in this one courageous, against all odds, bravely true yes. Our conversation is not one of those surfacey conversations. No, Lauren shares her amazing wisdom, knowledge, and experience with us, as well as inspiration and encouragement. I want to give you just a little warning before you listen or watch. Our connection was at times shoddy, so there are times when the connection breaks. But given the power of this conversation, I've chosen to still share it. I hope you'll bear with us. Here is our sacred conversation. Lauren, welcome to the Magdalene Voices. We're going to be diving into a topic that is such an important one, I believe, for those of us on this path. And I am honored that you have taken out, time in your very busy schedule. I know that you're moving and you've got new things coming out, and so I'm very honored that you've chosen to take the time to be here with us today. I'm just going to dive straight into it and ask you, what does boundaries mean to you?
Great question. First, thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here. This is one of my favorite conversations to have, so I'm excited to dive in. Boundaries means to me is the differentiation, the distinction between entities, whatever that is. It could be a boundary between properties, a boundary between people, a boundary between histories, time periods, but it's where something ends simply, where something ends and something else begins. That's this most simple description of boundaries for me.
You just blew my mind. I mean, we're not even we're not even 2 minutes in, and I'm like, what? Okay, because because that means also that oh, okay. So that, because you said beings and entities, so it's not even, oh, it's not, so it's all, it's, so there's an, so it's about energy and it's not, because, you know, I was coming from my human being self, and it's like, oh, boundaries, but then you're talking about entities and beings, and it's just like, oh, okay, well, that makes, I think we can end for today. Thank you very much for coming. I'm just kidding. I'm just like, I'm hoping everyone's minds are as blown as mine. Like, okay. So I know that you have such a deep compassion, no, not compassion, passion for boundaries. And I suppose when you mention, or when you have that passion for it, is it just between human beings, or is it between every entities, or all of those entities that you just mentioned?
All of them. My passion is about, my passion really begins with inner boundaries.
Yeah.
Which is about learning to distinguish what belongs to you, your ideas, your thoughts, your energy, your beliefs, your values, your needs, your hopes, your desires. Owning what is yours so that you can make the clear distinction between what isn't, between those external things. So essentially it's between you and everything. But it's also about but the most place to start is to know what's yours, your inner boundaries, which you can take full responsibility. For example, something people that is a super boundary issue that a lot of people don't think of, your emotions, your expectations are your boundaries to be responsible for, to take care of, to honor, to mind. And so then when all of these external boundaries come in around communication or external expectations, once you can take responsibility from, then you have the tool to communicate them. And what I often find is when people come into boundary work, they often are like, I need to know how to say this. I need to know how to ask for what I need. I need to know how to, or say no, or say yes, which are all essential for boundaries, but those are all external boundaries. Those are all ways of communicating your internal boundaries. But if you're not clear about your internal boundaries, the communication of them gets all mucky and muddied.
Yes. And my mind was just blown again. Sorry, but so I love that. So what you're saying is you have to start within before you go without. So it's about, because very often, you know, in terms of boundaries, like you said, it's like not only about communicating to others, these are my boundaries, but it's about, you know, we say boundaries, and then we think it's about setting a boundary so that others can't, you know, do what we don't want them to, or, you know, I just want that person to change, and then that I have to. So it's about, so where does that start? Because, oh, that's good, because it's not about, you know, because it's something that we can change. It's what you're essentially saying is something that we can change. We have the power to do that. It's
Absolutely.
Not about everyone else. Okay, so where do we start?
Well, you start by getting clear about what your values are, what your needs are, what your expectations are, and feeling worthy of them and being okay with them. I think what often happens is we start to second guess ourselves. I'm outside, so there's a little motorcycle going by right now. So we start to second guess ourselves, like, I really want this, or I really need this. This is my boundary, but who am I to want that? How maybe I can compromise. Am I being too demanding? Am I asking for too much? Yeah. We start compromising and negotiating our own inner boundaries. And so part of that is like owning them, taking up the space, all of our space, so that there is less space to impede on. So that's where we start, by like really being honest. The more, when you can be honest with yourself, that's where sovereignty is. That's where power is, in honesty, and not the judgment. When you're fully honest, there's no room for judgment, I think.
No, I completely agree. And it seems as though that is something that can go into basically every area of your life, you know. And again, like I said, I love how that actually starts within, because you know, for some reason inherent in the boundary, in the word boundaries, it seems as though it's actually a boundary that you, but it's in what you're saying, it doesn't so much sound as a boundary as it sounds as a, because to me at least, maybe I'm just wrong, but to me sometimes boundary sounds like a wall or a fence or you know, something that cuts you off. But if you were able to be in your full self, and correct me if I'm wrong, then maybe you don't, it's not that you don't need boundaries, but your boundaries are not something that is hard, and it's basically because there's no judgment. You're honest. This is who I am. This is the space I have. This is what I'm worthy of. And so it's not like you don't run around telling people, this is my boundary and this is my boundary and this is my boundary. It's automatic. Is that in it as well?
Absolutely. That is a huge part of it. Like, exactly, when you can be honest, take up all of your space without judgment, then you don't have to go around this. But in some senses, there is a wall, right? Like in some senses, there needs to be a wall. If you don't want to be slapped across the face, right? Like that it could be a wall. Now, so some things, but healthy boundaries are also permeable. Healthy boundaries can also have flexibility, but they're based on your relationship with yourself, not based on wanting to appease or please or make someone else happy or want to coddle someone's emotions. Or have conversations with my students who, as we work through the stuff that comes up as they're doing their own boundary work, right? And these are very real life questions that come up around family and money, you know, all these other things that, like, it sounds good, but when you start into the real world, things come up. And so once you start taking up all of your space without judgment and with honesty, it gives you more power to not have to coddle and not have to people please, and allows other people to take full responsibility for their boundaries. Right? Like you don't take responsibility for their boundaries, take responsibility for their boundaries. And they take responsibility for their boundaries. But it's a process.
Yeah, by having your boundaries in place, you allow for others to have their boundaries in place as well. And it's not a war or a fight. It's basically a, you know, communication or a partnership or a relationship. Why do you think that it is that so many seem to be struggling with boundaries?
Well, I think it's a complicated question, but it's also a simple question. I think a lot of it has to do with capitalism, quite honestly. Because capitalism is about domination and control, right? It's about selling you how to be a better whatever you. Telling you where you're deficient, telling you where you're not enough, telling you where you've missed the mark and how you can buy your way into being a better, more beautiful, skinnier you, and not just accepting that you are enough, right? And so I think that where it starts, also patriarchy is a part of this kind of institutionalized way that has taught women, particular, vulnerable, that our worth and value comes from other people liking, other people validating us, other people valuing us. And so who are we to dare want what we want? Who are we to dare say what we, and it starts to challenge our sense of worth and our sense of value to say, no, this is my boundary. And boundaries can look very, very different. For example, that has been in terms with myself recently. I have physical challenges and energetic, but I'm getting day.
Mm.
And when I go for the last 8 months, I went to Canada for a speaking gig from Mexico to Canada to Atlanta. So it was a lot of traveling, a lot of carrying heavy bags and carrying my dog, who you can see maybe right there in the background.
Yeah. Mine are downstairs.
Oh, sweet. And she's a good traveler. But I was carrying her because it was illegal to like let her free in the airport. Yeah. And because of my physical limitations and my energetic limitations, something I've had to come with big travel was that I need assistance when I'm traveling. I have to order a wheelchair. Now that was my own personal boundary that I had to set with myself after laying on the bed for 3 days after arriving here. That, Laren, you may think that because you have the physical capacity to carry all your bags and go through these big airports and like I could push myself, but for the long haul, for the big picture, it's not a good idea, right? Not sustainable.
Yes.
So I had to set that inner boundary with myself.
Yeah. That is so, that's so powerful and inspiring and I want to the viewers and the listeners, I want to encourage you to take what Laren just said and apply it in your own life and see where you are perhaps pushing yourself too much. And I love what you said about the patriarchy. And I think it's so deeply ingrained that there may be some who say, oh, it's not about the patriarchy. But what I've found, in our awakening journeys as we unveil ourselves, it's like when you begin to see the fine threads of the patriarchy and how it's woven into everything, not just for women, but for men who believe it too. It's bullshit. And it's just, it informs so much of our conscious life, but it's unconscious that we're unconscious about how these threads actually are woven into our quote unquote makeup. So I loved how you said that.
And
go ahead.
And I totally agree. It also, because patriarchy essentially prevents all of us from experiencing our full humanity. It tells men they can't be vulnerable.
Exactly.
Ask for help. They can't need things. They can't be soft and sensitive and receptive.
Yeah.
And it teaches women they're weak if they do.
Yeah.
She's such an alert dog. She's not going to do anything else. She's just going to bark.
Yes.
Someone just stopped, pulled over and asked if
you were saying about how it's also impacting men. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It impacts all of us because it limits our humanity, right? Every human being should feel comfortable being vulnerable and soft and tender and receptive. And every human being should feel comfortable being strong and assertive. And wherever you personally fall on the range, right, is your personality, like who you are individually. But I don't believe it's dictated by your gender or your sex, right? It's like we should all be able to say, I'm tired. I don't want to do this anymore. Or this isn't my responsibility. Or I need help. I need support. Or I got this. I'm in charge. Not from a place of ego, but from a place of truth. So those are all boundary things.
Yeah. And then
within ourselves. So me asking for a wheelchair is not a boundary issue.
No. And then it becomes, because what you're describing, it becomes a beautiful dance between us where we're able to, when some of us there are days when some of us are stronger, and I don't want to say weaker because I'm not necessarily sure that's the right word, but so it becomes a dance where we're able to basically hold space and lift each other together and lift, everyone. And that's part of the reason why I'm proud to be Danish and come from a society where we have, I know for some in the US that's a bad word, but we have socialism, right? And I don't mind paying my taxes knowing that someone else will be supported, and lifted, because that's how a just world or society is when we're able to lift each other together. That's how I see it.
Yes.
Do you think, because I have a theory about how, and I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of maybe it's the patriarchy, but it's like we're born into this world like these beautiful rays of light and babies, and then it seems as though we go through a period of time where everything becomes compressed and we have all of these protective layers put in place, and then once we begin once we receive the call or our awakening and we begin to lift the veils, it seems as though we become more sensitive, or because there's like, and I wonder, how does boundaries play part in that? Do you see that journey as well? Like, because I guess that one of the things that I'm pondering currently is those of us who do the work and we clear the path. Those who went before us have cleared their path, and we're clearing loads so that those that come after us can then do more and be more and have quote unquote more, not in the I don't mean in the material sense, but be more in the world, like what you talked about, that we can allow for them to take up more space because we've done the work. I'm wondering do you see that, is there a pattern in that? Like, do children arrive fully formed they actually do with the right boundaries, and then they're told not to have boundaries, and then what is your take on that? Am I making any sense? Is my question making any sense in terms of when do we become boundaryless?
Completely, yes.
Go ahead.
I don't think we ever become boundaryless, and I think it's culturally relative. So something that's really important to me when I talk about these kinds of things and think about these kinds of things like this, whether it's race, culture, patriarchy, gender, sexuality, I like to take a global perspective and a historic perspective. Because yes. I think we get sometimes so kind of in the nitty gritty of our own personal lives, our own personal experience, or this moment in time, that we think this is the way it's always been, or that this is the way it is everywhere.
Yes.
Look at the way people in different parts of the world experience boundaries, the way in different people over periods of time have experienced boundaries, what that means. That yes. In particularly ingrained in the cultural framework. And where boundaries, our cultural norms, cultural expectations are ingrained and become something that you follow based on your values, based on the spiritual beliefs, based on the narrative of that land. Now, we can like exoticize that and like going into the woods and smoking something and like sitting in a hut for 6 months, or we can also think about that our idea of boundaries and patriarchy and gender norms much ingrained in rites of passage and culture and our own stories and the ways that we are ingrained in that too, right? So once we can see that loosens the skin on it, because it makes it more agile and more nimble and less static, not as rigid and black and white. We can see that it's mutable, it's changeable, it evolves. There's a story from Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves, but she has another book that's called The Danger, which I love. And one of the stories in that is about the tree that withstood winter. And she talks about this story where she says every tree has to create a hardened layer around its heart in order to survive winter. Like the heart of the tree has to harden, like it has to create a protective shell around it. So it's not personal, it's not mean, which is like the ultimate boundary, right? It's about creating a protective layer around your heart so that you're not vulnerable to the whims of the world. And that's how I think about boundaries. How do we, regardless of, because at some point we have to create our own narrative. It's not about the patriarchy or all of these kind of external messagings of what that boundary should be and who we should be. but
Yeah.
it's about how do we create a boundary around our heart that's healthy for us, that's fortifying for us, that allows us to thrive and grow and take up all our space and be honest and be fully self-expressed. That requires not caring what other people think and not needing other people's validation, right? And not needing all these other things. Those are boundaries, which some people are scared to implement, but it's true nonetheless.
I want to get out of my chair and just run around going, yes, 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 because it's like, yes. And I hadn't heard that story about the tree, and it makes so much sense. So are we then back to what you said about like in terms of starting by examining your like how do we know if our boundaries are too low or too high or being stepped over? How do we know?
I think we all know. I don't think it's not in the knowing. I think it's in the second guessing, in doubting. We know, like when you're like, I don't like this. Now, you may have second guessed about it and been raised and conditioned to do that your whole life, but somewhere deep inside, so I think the work isn't really about what it is, knowing if the work is about honoring what you know.
Ooh. Oh, yes. Oh. And that's where the honesty comes in that you mentioned.
Exactly.
That is, again, it's so profound. Like it's so profound that, because I'm all about honesty. In terms of boundaries, I think you've kind of touched upon it, but we talk about healthy boundaries and unhealthy boundaries, or proper boundaries, or flexible boundaries. What, I guess the answer is probably going to be, we have the guardian of the garden. So what, in terms of, because it's just everything, because it's like everything you're saying is just like, it comes back to self, but also in terms of, like you said, on a global scale. And I love that part where it's like, because you basically take you out of it and have us reflect on it on a larger scale, because it's like you said, so often we become like, oh, we have tunnel vision. It's like, it's my journey, it's my journey, it's my journey, but the journey is really, your journey is really a part of the whole collective. Where are we as a collective on a global scale in terms of boundaries right now, do you find? I mean, I know we're going far out in terms of boundaries. It's not just, but like, where are we on a global scale? What's happened? Because,
I don't know. Honestly, there's so many different things happening all at the same time. We have a lot of people on the planet, 7.5 billion people. So it's hard for me to like make a global assessment. Because I think some folks are going backwards, some folks are going forwards. Some folks are falling asleep. Some folks are waking up. Some folks are taking advantage of their privileges, and some folks are trying to use them for liberation for everybody.
Yes.
So it's kind of hard to summarize. But around boundaries, I think what it is beautiful to see is that there are so many people who are still fighting, still working, still mobilizing, getting louder, getting bolder, getting bigger. And, I don't know that there will ever be this moment in time where we've like arrived as a humanity,
Yeah. Essentially,
because you can look at the internet as a power. Right, exactly. All 7 billion people. I don't know that, but to their kind of own discretion. So I don't know. But what I do know is that we can have these conversations in Atlanta, you in Denmark, right? Like this may never have happened 20 years ago
No.
5 years ago this way, and we are sparking a different conversation around, and
Yeah.
people who are, but there's so many things going on in so many different layers that it's hard
Yes.
for me to make a sweeping
Yeah.
generalization.
And I also, something that again, what I see, and I also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I hear and what you're saying is, because to me, a lot of people seem to think that being spiritual or having a spiritual journey or an awakening journey or whatever you want to call it is something personal and to be kept for oneself, where I believe that, because I know that was where I was at. It was me, and all of me. But there came a time when I realized all of the work that I'm doing, if I just do it for myself, who am I? Like, who am I in the world? I have to be. I can't. I have to stand for what is right, not just for myself, but for everyone, no matter their gender or sexuality or color or faith. It's about that, and that's where the boundary work then comes in terms of, no, I will not stand for this. This is not right. This is not, so. And that's what I hear, and what you're saying is that there comes a time. Well, I don't know if that, but at least that's what I'm hearing, and what you're saying, that there comes a time in our journey when our journey is no longer our own, but it's part of the collective journey. And so what the work that you do actually expands further into the world. Am I putting words in your mouth?
I think it's a both and. I think it's always our own, and it's always intrinsically connected to the global journey.
Yeah.
I think it's always both and. It's like the metaphor of being a wave in the ocean, right? There are individual waves, but you're part of the ocean.
Lauren, you were talking about both the personal and the collective responsibility, or I'm not sure if that was how I phrased it, and you had some profound wisdom to share with us. So go ahead.
So I think it's a both and. It's an
Yes.
individual journey always, and a collective journey. Because you're inextricably connected to the whole. We are all inextricably connected, and we're all on our own individual journeys. So it's important to mind the both and it's like the metaphor of being a wave in the ocean, right? Like each
Yes.
wave is its own individual wave, but it's
Yes.
also still part of the collective. So as we continue evolving and continue healing, I think one of the dangers we get into in this modern society is thinking that progress means kind of forgetting all of these ancient practices and beliefs and traditions, and they weren't all bad. Right. There are a lot of cultures and people and nations have really beautiful boundaries and really beautiful ways of communicating and really beautiful ways of honoring the collective and the individual. So I think it's important about bringing forward what is useful and beneficial and letting go of what doesn't serve the collective evolution of us all. And so that's the part that I think needs to be continually explored and examined and peeled back is like, who is this really benefiting? And
Yes.
as that larger conversation that you said earlier, like who, and am I honoring my own boundaries? Because you also don't want to get to the point where you're like, I'm sacrificing my own individual boundaries for the collective. That's not healthy either.
No, because then we end up with a society of, well, I guess where a lot of people are right now, with a lot of people who have unhealthy boundaries, who have let themselves be walked over. And I tend to think that, because for the work that I do, where it's heart-based, soul-driven entrepreneurs, where it's like, setting boundaries, whether they be strong or proper or flexible or whatever it is, it's a necessity. And no one, because somehow being love-based somehow becomes equated with being walked all over.
Right.
And that's not very healthy.
That ain't it.
No, that ain't it at all. I'm being asked, I know that you have a master class, and I wasn't going to ask, but I'm being asked. I'm like, I have the people here saying, have her talk about that. So will you talk about, because I know that you have a master class where you have people go through this. Would you just share a little bit about that?
Sure. So Brave Boundaries Boot Camp is a masterclass for empaths, particularly highly sensitive people who are working through their boundary challenges. Because so often people who are empaths or HSPs, which are not the same thing, even though you can be both, have muddied boundary issues. And so this Brave Boundaries is about how do you reclaim your power, take up all your space, learn to use your voice, especially when you're highly sensitive and you may inadvertently take on other people's emotions or inadvertently take on other people's physical pains, or you may take on other people's energy, and it's beyond kind of what you know how to wield or control. And so Brave Boundaries Bootcamp for Empaths specifically is about how do you make your empathic gifts superpowers without kind of exhausting yourself, because it can be so exhausting to feel like you're at the whim of the world. And so that's what it's about. And it goes through lots of things in our vulnerabilities and receptivities to naturopaths and energy vampires, and how do you communicate around that, and how do you own it without being rigid, like we talked about, and being overly harsh, but also just honoring your truth, honoring your sensitivities, because we can get very metaphysical about it, but in the actual physical sense, being an empath and HSP are based in neuropathic sensitivities. It's based in your brain's sensitivity. And so it shows up in all kinds of different ways, and it comes from all kinds of different things, but there are ways to wield it so that you're not exhausted by it.
Yes. I love how you weave what I call it, weaving the worlds of spiritual and physical, because very often, if someone is highly, or that's the way I see it, like when you're highly sensitive or an empath or, spiritually open, it becomes this, oh, I'm just in the realms, but you have to deal with your physical reality as well. And it sounds to me that that's part of what you're doing in that masterclass or boot camp, is that there is a reality check of, because it's not like we can't just spiritually bypass. It's like, oh, if I just sit here and meditate, they'll go away. Well, it won't,
Right.
Yeah.
And that's an example of, like, when I said I was talking about ordering the wheelchair, that was a way to take care of myself as someone whose airports are rough on me, right? Like, it's a lot physically, energetically, they're exhausting. This is a big trip to go from Atlanta to LA to Hong Kong to Bangkok to Chiang Mai. That's a big trip. So there are things I do physically, there are things I wear, things I don't wear, ways that I prepare myself physically and as an empath and a highly sensitive person to make sure that I can endure that whole trip without being depleted. So because I am in the physical world, like that, meditating all day is helpful. It is one way I prepare, right? But it's not it's not a invisibility cloak.
No, no, unfortunately not. And like, la, I'm not here.
Right.
Yes. And I think that's very important to, again, like, to inspire people to have an investigation of their own, like, where should you be taking better care of yourself because I think it's such a profound thing that you share, because to me, I was thinking about doing that would require so much of me in terms of my own self-judgment. Oh, you shouldn't be doing that because what won't people think? And I do have two legs, and there would be this whole line of judgment, like you said in the beginning. You said it's like the whole line of judgment of myself, rather, and that's an external, it's got nothing, it's what I'm already in other people. What will they think about me if I do this? It's like, oh, okay, hold on, there was another question that came up in terms of boundaries and yes, so how do you use because I loved how you earlier on said how the you actually pulled it back. You can't you in everything that you've said, you've continually pulled it back into, like, I guess that would be sovereignty. Like the this is like, I claim my power. This is it within my possibility and within my realm and so forth. How do you use the mirroring you see in the world, or the reflections you see in the world, as a way of enforcing or checking or asserting your boundaries? Not asserting, but like, how can you use the reflections or the mirroring that you have from the world in terms of your boundaries?
Will you say more about that?
Yes. So, so instead of having, people walk all over us and then realizing, oh, I need to set a boundary, and oh, this was not in place. There comes a time when we're able to use, or that's the way I see, we're able to use the reflections from a space of abundance and love to fortify, to be more flexible, to rebuild, to reshape our boundaries, rather than from the ground up, because it's always changing, I suppose, or no. So how can we, rather than have people get to the point where we feel that people have walked all over us, how can we stop that earlier on?
Okay. So I think it really begins with, it's not about the mirror of the world. I think it's really about yourself. It always begins and ends with the self, right? Like, if you know what your boundaries are, it makes it much easier not to be at the whim of the world. The world is, what's the word? There's another word that I'm looking for, but let's just say flaky, right? The world is moody. The world is decides based on what's trendy, what's popular, what the new president said, whatever, right? Like, so to be at the whim of the world is very dangerous. I think it's the only sovereignty really comes from being rooted in your own truth, and having and being an expression of that. But because when you give more people permission to be the expression of their own truth. And it's not about reflecting other people's truth as much as it is about being an expression of your own. And then the boundaries come and are established from there.
Whoop, whoop. I wanna high five and chest bump you. It's just, is there anything that we haven't touched upon that you would like, is there something that comes up for you that you feel that hasn't been said or should be shared? Or
I mean, from my own journey with boundaries, something that's important that I'm learning and continuing to learn is that it is a journey. Even though I teach boundary work and I've been doing boundary work for a long time, I'm still coming into clearer understandings of my own boundaries, or places where I violated my own boundaries, or places where I haven't had healthy boundaries, and how I can keep healing on a deeper level. And so for everyone who's new to their own boundary journey, I just encourage self-compassion and self-care, and not to beat yourself up for not getting it quote unquote right. Like, we don't live in a culture that teaches us how to do this. So if you're learning, you're doing something that a lot of people have never done before. And it's okay to not get it right or get it perfect or not know what you're doing. Like, be gentle and keep going, right? Not be gentle and give up, not be gentle and cower, not be gentle and hide, but be gentle and just keep going.
Keep going. When you say that, for me currently, something that I see a lot is that seems to be ongoing is how we teach children to have their boundaries crossed over and over again, in terms of how they greet strangers and how they greet their grandparents or their uncles. Go kiss this person, go hug this person, go, even if they don't want to, then we actually quote unquote force them. So we teach them to cross their own boundaries. And I guess in terms of what you said in you know, it being a journey, I think that's basically what I meant in terms of the reflection. So it's not so much being dependent on the world to mirror us, but to be open for that self-inquiring, the
Yes.
the the checking, that not the checking, but seeing, okay, yeah, I I love everything you said, and my, I hope, I think, because I know that my mind has been blown, so I don't I don't think that I'm the only one who's listened to this. Lauren, I want to say again, thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to be here. And thank you for, you know, being you, and for the work that you do and continue to do in this work and share with us.
Thank you so much.
In the show notes, I'm going to be sharing the Brave Boundaries bootcamp or masterclass you talked about. I'm going to be sharing those books that you mentioned, as well as your site and so forth, so that if people want to go ahead and check that out, they can click the link, and then they can find everything, so they can find you wherever you're at. So
Thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. I'm really honored to have talked about this with you with such depth and beauty. Like this was good. We got deep into some stuff.
yes, yes, we did. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take good care.
Yes, you too.
Okay.
That is what I had for you in today's episode of the Magdalene Voices. For all of the deeds and the details, find the show notes on my website, mariastella.com. Know that I would love to hear how it resonated with you and what you got from it. So tag me on Instagram or leave me a comment on either my website or YouTube. Finally, if it served you, please take a moment to share it with a friend or on social media. God bless.